that sounds like that's the approach you took. Was
Right.
were you able to kind of see it, but you also were willing to own, where your role in those patterns and change it.
Oh yeah.
And honestly, faith is, research shows women that have a strong spiritual foundation have the most resilience after a situation like what you experienced.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And you said, and what you said there was right. Taking ownership for your role, because many times we always want to share the story that, that person was all the bad person and I was the innocent person. And I am not trying to portray that in any way, shape or form. And I can remember my son saying, when he got older, he was like, the best thing that ever happened was that my mom and dad got divorced.
Yeah.
Because that house sucked.
Yeah. And honestly, I think I'm so glad you said that, because one of my biggest messages is staying in an unhealthy, toxic marriage for the kids is not doing them any favors. And
right.
The fact that you were able to see that and get out of that situation and have your child validate that was the right thing to do.
Right.
So that must have felt really good.
Yeah. Hearing that, that was definitely a win, if you want to call it that. So,
yeah. So, okay. So then you're out of the marriage, you've kind of connected with your faith, you're getting some counseling. And then what happens?
So then I met this nice person who had no substance abuse issues and seemed very strong. And I actually decided to walk into marriage a third time. And so that one was, he was very not combative, didn't have any of those issues that was going on. And it felt safe. It just felt safe. So.
Okay. And how long out of your second marriage did he come along? Approximately.
Probably 2 years.
2 years. Okay. So 2 years of healing. And then this other gentleman comes along. Is this your current husband?
No.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about that marriage.
So we were married for 10 years. And so in that marriage, we had a lot of things that we liked to do the same. We both rode motorcycles. He was a pilot, had a plane, liked to fly. So very outdoor active from that sense of stuff of liking to do. But at the same time, he grew up in a really difficult home life. His father was a World War II vet and I believe suffered PTSD now that I understand that better. And so there were things that he was navigating, and he was very, what do I want to say? He had a very protective of his heart type situation, but a good guy. He treated me very good, and there was no abuse, no verbal abuse, nothing.
Okay.
Went on with that.
Okay.
But in the midst of that is when my son, Nicholas, was actually tragically in a drunk driving crash. And so when I got that call and that he was in a drunk driving crash and he was actually in the hospital, he had a massive head injury and had to go to that hospital. We were living in Colorado because Nick had already graduated from high school, and we were living in Colorado. So I had to fly back to Ohio. And in that, my son, he lived for 5 days. And
wow.
Had to be in the hospital at his side. And we talked a little bit about this. And this is when, because I had no communication with my ex, Nick was grown, all of that, communication, there was no need for communication at all anymore. So thrust back into a traumatic situation, which anybody in that situation, and the emotions are high, it's volatile. We're both navigating this horrific trauma that has happened to our child. And that was a very difficult 5 days to be thrust back into that situation. Especially I had grown stronger in my faith in the interim, and he had no faith. And so there were so many people there that were pastors and people that were coming to the hospital that were praying, came and showed up, brought food and praying and all that, and which was a support system for me. But for him, he referred to it as a circus.
Oh, wow.
So because that wasn't his lifestyle, and he didn't embrace any of that whatsoever. So having all of those people coming and going, and there would be 100 people in the waiting room, which would be Nick's friends and people that he knew, and then people coming in. And so I would imagine, based on, looking back now, for him, he probably needed it to be more private, while I, was.
You needed a team of support around you.
Right.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he probably was based on what you're describing. I'm imagining that he probably needed privacy to experience that vulnerability. He didn't want that to be on display, so to speak, whereas you needed that support around you to help you through it. Yeah.
Right. So, and we're all different in that. And it came down to the last day, when they had come to me, and, the doctor came in and had a conference with us, and Nick had 2 blood flow scans, and he was clinically brain dead. He was gone. And I had enough medical knowledge to understand everything. And I was just like, be straight with me. I get it. I know what's going on. I walked into that hospital room. I could see the ventilator, see everything. And I knew exactly where Nick was at, because I had 20 some years, I had, worked in that field. And so I understood where he was. And the really tragic thing, I feel like, was that his dad, he just got up and he said, I'm not making that decision. It's all on you.
Oh, wow. Beverly.
Yeah. So, I had to just, with my older son, who was in the military at that time, him and I together. And I think, I'm so thankful that I had him by my side. He was very strong man at that time. But, they had, it was at a point where Nick was gone.
Yeah.
So,
it sounds like the machines were holding him or keeping him alive.
That was it. And they had everything maxed. There was no more.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we were either it was going to be a miracle healing from God or not, that's where we were with that. So, and Nick had expressed, when he got his driver's license at 16, when I took him to get his license, we talked about the organ donor. And so he had expressed, and he was such a giving child. He was so full of love and light. And he had expressed that he, if anything ever happened to him, that, he wanted to be an organ donor, and had chosen that on his driver's license. So we had to go through and navigate making all that happen as well. And for me, in that, I was at a place after that, I didn't want anything to do with that side of things afterwards, where I think he did. But I don't know that for sure. But it was really, really, here's the bad thing. When it was time to make all the arrangements, he had stepped up and to make all the arrangements and told me what time to be there. And then I got a call saying, you know what, I've already made them all, and this is how much it is. Wow. That wasn't the right thing to say to me on that day.
Yeah. Especially considering you had to be the one to make the decision.
Right.
That on whether or not to keep him alive. And then he turns around and makes the funeral arrangements without consulting you. Yeah. I can imagine what that must have felt like.
Yeah. So that, was, and I remember on the day of the funeral, and and here's my boundary coming out. I remember as we were walking behind the casket, I just remember telling him, you know what, because he had created so much nastiness in the midst of that. And I just remember looking at him and saying, you know what, Nick is going in the ground today. And you know what, you're dead to me. Don't ever contact me again for anything.
Yeah.
So, and that's just what I had to do. I mean, I just lost my son.
Yeah.
And so it was hard. It was very difficult to go through that.
I can only imagine. So, and I'm sure you're true to your word. You never have had any communication with him since then.
No, we had to go through court. We had to go through courts because this was a criminal. We had to go through the criminal proceedings and in that type of thing. But we were never in a place where there was any one-on-one. It was always
just communication. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So how long did it take you? I'm sure you're still healing from all of that, but
from you know what? When you lose a child, you never truly heal. You never move on. And you learn to move forward in life. You can make a decision, and this is where I was at. I had to make a choice or a decision to want to live again and to want to honor him, honor his legacy. And I chose that route. But it wasn't until really after, because with my third husband, he ended up 10 years after we were married, he ended up taking his life.
Oh, wow. Okay, so how far after your son dying did this happen?
3 years.
Oh, Beverly. Wow. Okay. So 3 years after your son dies in the car accident, your husband takes his own life. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So I had to navigate that. I had to navigate that. Most people will look and say, nobody goes through that much stuff in life. You know what? And I look back and I think, I can't believe I've had to go through that much stuff in life. But, I'm here today. I'm a survivor. I have resiliency. I was able for whatever, I could just say by the grace of God, because if I had not started into that foundation, I would not be here today. And I had to fight every day to live after that.
I bet you did. And talk about having your faith carry you. That had to be a time when your faith carried you.
Right.
Through.
Absolutely. I was probably a year out from that when I call it a divine appointment. I was put into the path of a Vietnam veteran who had a ministry for our military with PTSD. I won't go into the whole backstory of all of that, but he ended up kind of mentoring me and bringing me into his organization, and used me to share my story to our soldiers, airmen, Marines, coming home from the war that were suffering from PTSD. And this is what I really want to say, that brought me healing, because it put me in a place where I took my eyes off of my own pain. And people would say, well, do you think you should be up there sharing your story over and over again? Doesn't that just take you back into that pain again? Well, you know what? Yeah, it was very painful. But I found the more I shared, the more I healed. And when I realized that everything that I had been through was being used to help these other people that were in that place of darkness where I was, and it was saving lives, then I realized, okay, I have a purpose out of this. I'm leaving a legacy for my son. Every time I share, I could talk about who Nick was and the things that he did in life, and the decisions and the choices that my husband made, that what it was like to be left behind when these guys would have wives or kids or whatever. And they would come up to me and they would say, I never thought about what it would do to my mother. I never thought about what it would do to my wife or my kids. Oh my gosh, because you're so in such a place of darkness and pain, you can't see outside.
You can't see outside. You're so right. You're so right. And one thing I want to comment on here, because I think you make such a compelling point, and I want to emphasize it for the listeners. So sharing your story, whether that's with a therapist, whether that's with a support group, or whether that's in front of a bunch of Vietnam veterans, sharing your story is healing. And the fact that you're even able to share this story today and be so emotionally regulated, to me, shows how much you healed from it.